Welcome to the Travel Business Unpacked, where passion meets possibility. Here's your host, Meredith Calloway.
Hello, and welcome to the Travel Business Unpacked podcast. Today's episode is going to be a really great conversation. My guest today is Stuart Marra with the Opulent Explorer. He is the co-founder. I'm used to calling myself a co-founder. So he is the sole founder of the Opulent Explorer and a fantastic guest for people who are considering a pretty significant career change, coming from maybe a fast-paced, high energy, but also high stress environment of selling and complicated things into following your heart, which is building a business around your passion for travel. Stuart went through our travel MBA program, which he was possibly the first person in our travel MBA program to exceed $1 million in sales in the first year, which is remarkable in and of itself. He is a member of the Top Producers Club, a consistent member of the Top Producers Club, and he is also in our top 5. So we are sitting with an MVP here, and I get to spend the next however many minutes tapping his brain and helping anybody else listening, hopefully inspire you, hopefully guide you, direct you, and answer some questions that you might have about selling luxury or building a business around a passion for travel. So welcome to the studio, Stuart. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a lovely intro. Very flattering. Thank you. It was very nice.
Well, I mean, it is it's the facts. So the facts stand for themselves. You have done a tremendous job of starting from nothing in the travel industry and leaning into your own passion, but also leaning into the coaching that you've had and leaning into the community that you've had around you. So let's start with just give everyone a better picture of your life before you started a travel business.
Yeah. So I worked in equity derivatives and risk arbitrage, which are two financial disciplines that are really correlated perfectly to probabilities, which is my kind of default thought process in life. I'm not a black and white thinker at all. I'm always just like, well, what's the likelihood of this? What's the likelihood of that? It makes me maybe overly rational at times, but I'm certainly a very emotional guy. I'm a musician, photographer, creative type. In addition to kind of having this odd financial thing, they didn't really go together that well. The ability to do the Wall Street, the trading for hedge funds and all that at that level in New York City for 20 years was a result of having good math skills. But I think the success of it really was resided in people and creativity skills, which, Wall Street's a money gig, and it can be fun. It's Knicks games and seafood towers in New York City, as we used to joke in the old days, at least. But when you start to get older, it wears on you. You're out a lot. And my cousin gave me some great advice. He's 10 years older than me, to the day, to plus 1 day. And he's a very, very, very close friend of mine. He said, spend your paychecks and save your bonuses. In your 40s, you'll have options. You'll be surprised how few people do. And when I was at 40, I was financially in a good position to walk away from that life if I wanted to. And I did. And I thought to myself that the best way to live my life going forward was to follow my passion, which was travel and photography and creative. And I'm like, well, I could probably turn some of these, hedge fund type clients, private equity types into travelers under this new business, because I've got this whole I've been where you're going next thing going on. But it would have been incredibly arrogant to just like, I got this, like every Wall Street bro out there is like, I got it. It's a really annoying thing that they do. So I had the awareness to recognize that while I was business wise, I was in a good place, But, and travel wise, I was in an extraordinary place. Now 250 international trips, plus 7 continents and 72 countries, 2/3 of those more than once. I didn't have the ability to sell travel. I'd never done it before. So I sought out a virtuoso entity to be a host, and I learned what a host was at that time through a host agency review. And lo and behold, Gifted Travel Network was one of the only ones offering a program called the Travel MBA program, which I did from 18 to 19. And then I was going to launch in March of 20, but something came up. I don't remember anything come to mind.
Yes, so, I remember what came up very clearly.
So I set up some screens over here where I have a keyboard, moved the keyboard out. This is kind of a music studio room, and set up, and I was doing my Wall Street gig. But truth be told, I had a pool cue, a pool table in the other room, and I grabbed the cue and I just moved the mouse just so I looked alive, because I knew, but I made myself a deal by the end of the year, end of 2020, regardless, I was going to go full time, which I did. So that's kind of how the road was traveled.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. So when you started the business, you had already left your prior career, and what was it that one of the things that I like to say is you're never more clear on what you want than when you experience what you don't want. And I think that you had a lot of don't wants in that environment. What were some of the things that you were very clear that you really wanted in your next endeavor because of that?
Wall Street really lacks community. It's disappointing on that front. It's a lot of, throw a piece of meat in the middle of the room, everybody fights over it, which in your younger years is a lot of fun. And the competition's great. And it teaches you a couple things. We're both golfers, Meredith, and it's nice to have a lot of clubs in your bag. I have 4 wedges, for instance, and you have varying degrees of law.
Is that legal?
Yeah. I think what is the max number 13?
I don't know what
oh yeah, no, it's legal
too, right? Like if you're just playing recreational, doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I think it added a club to my bag to have that level of professionalism to operate at that speed. And most of my peers would think that it's not portable, but it is. And it was on me to figure it out. And I think that's where, I started to recognize that there was no community aspect to it. So I wanted a community aspect to it. I didn't like being chained to the desk anymore. I literally would have to turn my computer monitor to the person next to me if I ran to the bathroom. It was, because you could miss something in that moment. And then it's just not possible. So I was like, well, I really, that was the, money doesn't buy you happiness. It buys you freedom. My father would always say. So I was always like, I don't feel free here at all. And the community stinks. So if I can get out of that and go find a community and what could be a better community than hospitality, for God's sakes? It's like everybody is hospitable and it's fun. And you trade doing trades for, going to Peru for 10 days, and then selling it and optimizing clients based on having been. So from a former derivative and arbitrage person's point of view, my job, as I see it, is to mitigate volatility in this industry. But to answer your question directly, I really wanted a community, and I really wanted to break free from that. And the only way to do it was to put the money aside and be in a position and then take a leap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and leap you did, which is so when you made the leap, let's talk about one major difference between what you were doing. Obviously, it's a different industry, but you went from were you an actual employee?
I was.
Yeah. So you went from being an employee to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
How was that transition?
Well, the first thing I had to recognize was that my philosophy of speaking to people in business was very transactional, because it's derivatives and it's arbitrage. You're on the phone, you're like this. It's like, the old Wall Street movies. You do have 2 phones and you have 4 screens. And there's a lot going on and you got to be like, all right, what are we doing? We got to get this done. But you can't do that with travel. You can't be like, all right, where do you want to go? I want to book this. You can't do that. So I had to unwind some of that and soften some of that, which helps as you step away from that world. Helps that that's not my identity. Wall Street guys, a lot of times it can be their identity in New York. My identity was more associated with, music, photography, travel, things that were, more near and dear to me. But it is a very big difference to go from being an employee with, very steady income to totally winging it. And every trip is commission based and you don't know when a trip's going to come. You have some scarcity of bookings and you're like, is this me? Am I missing something? Is that why they're not coming? Or is it just the way my clients are not booking right now? I mean, and honestly, you have to do this in order to know. You can't just jump in and hire an executive assistant and go. You have to start at the beginning and you have to do really bad bookings. And by bad bookings, I mean like 4-star, like less, like really grind it out and know so that you have the clarity to never go back. But also having learned from that, my music producer, Breck, would say, man, ain't no way to it but through it. And when we're playing, I'm struggling with something. That's what he says. And I'm like, yeah, that's true of everything. It's just true of everything.
I think that's a really important point, is that if you want to start a travel business as a travel business that is a travel consulting business, you have to, start from scratch. You have to start at the beginning. You have to go through the motions of selling the kind of travel that you don't ultimately want to sell. For the same reason, as I said earlier, is like you're never more clear on what you want than when you experience what you don't want. And so you have to have some of those moments of, oh, I don't want to do this again. I don't want a client like this again. And I have to get clear. One of the mistakes I think a lot of travel entrepreneurs make, or travel advisors who are new to the business make, is this, I have to take any and all business that comes my way because I'm sending a message that, I don't want to send the wrong message if I don't. Did you have that mentality at first at all, or was it a variation of that?
I didn't think I had the right to have that mentality yet because I hadn't had the experience with clients to turn anybody away, So I think when you're building your business, it's humbling, and it's a great humbling to not know and to struggle. But I think the reason for the travel MBA program with Gifted for me was that I don't go to school on these extraordinary relationships that I have and mess up somebody's safari. So because I'm inexperienced. So I think that you really have to do all of the little stuff and make the mistakes, and you have to learn from your colleagues, learn from your suppliers, learn from your partners in travel to try to figure out, what's the best road for you. But it was only later that that clarity starts to evolve. Yeah. And then you start to say to yourself, okay, why did that one go wrong? And after a while, if you have some awareness, you'll be like, well, that was me. I wasn't prepared. I didn't do this, or I wasn't. And this is really where I think we're taking this in this question is, what business did I have booking this trip? Have I ever been? Do I have good suppliers? Is this what I do? Is this what I'm good at? For me, the 4-star market is not my market. I don't know those properties. I don't go to those properties. And as a result, I'm not good at it. So if somebody comes to me with something in the early years, I've made it work. But over time, my philosophy is I've been where you're going next. And I was fortunate enough because I did well all those years in travel. I mean, obviously well enough to retire at 42 to do this, as a passion project, that I've been to all these places. And what those people would gravitate towards me, Meredith, in my clients, because I had been, and because they could tell that I'm not so hungry for the money, and it all kind of plays in. So that's how I'd start with this answer.
I think that someone looking on from the outside looking in and hearing your story might jump to the conclusion, well, he was lucky because he brought this Rolodex of connections that would be natural clients right away. And so it's much easier for someone like Stuart than it would be for me because I don't have those connections. How would you reply to that?
Well, I would say, you could also be fired any minute, I mean, Wall Street is cruel. And, I grew up with some health stuff that you and I have discussed over time, and we can get into a bit, but when you're taking off on an airplane or a rocket, it's really hard to break through that atmosphere. You really are full throttle to get up. But once you break above the clouds and you hit cruising altitude, it's nice and chill.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very hard to get to that altitude. Gravity's trying to pull you down. And gravity is a billion different things in this analysis. But there's a billion things trying to pull you down, including yourself. And the hardest, so it's easy to look at me now and be like, oh yeah, he's got it easy. But, I was also born with cystic fibrosis. And when I was diagnosed March of 78, I was 3 months old. I was still my birth weight, and I was given about a 5% chance of surviving in the next couple of weeks. Lo and behold, I'm now 47. So 40 years later, how you doing? But
well, and also the life expectancy of people with CF is, 20, 25 years, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And I never told anybody this story until we got this into remission. But yeah, in November of 19, we got it in remission. And, so luck has nothing to do with this. This was a lot of hard work. I mean, it took everything I had to survive that. And when they diagnosed, they said best case scenario was 7 years old. And as I said, I'm now 47 years old and in remission. I'm, 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, all very unusual, but it took a tremendous amount of work and discipline. And so did building this business. And so did, working on Wall Street. And, Meredith, when I was in high school, they're like, you'll never go to college. And, when I was in college, you'll never travel. When you travel, you'll never not live at home because you need help. And every time I was like this to that. Right. And so to anybody who would say, he had it easy, like, well, you want my life now, but you didn't want anything to do with it. And almost nobody survived it, particularly to this level of being successful in a variety of different things to this point. So I think that it's everybody gets something, and it's either a catalyst for you or an excuse. And, oh, poor me. And they start to maybe drink too much or God knows what. Right. And it's always going to be something. For me, it was health. But so you're always going to get something. It's either a catalyst or an excuse. It's a big thing I've said my whole life. And once I broke through the atmosphere into that cruising altitude, it went from a headwind to a tailwind in this analogy, because now I'm like, well, if I can beat that and I was that successful and there's a maturity that it took to beat that my whole life, well, what else can I do? And that's really the enviable thing, is not the Wall Street contacts or anything. It's the mindset that comes
totally agree. And that's exactly why I wanted you on the podcast, is because there's so much depth to the lessons that you can bring to other people. I've always said that the entrepreneurial journey is like one massive personal development boot camp. And so, because when you're an employee, you're going to be asked to step outside your comfort zone. But when you're an entrepreneur, you're asked to step outside your comfort zone like 10 times as often. It's a daily thing. You're stretching yourself all the time. But because of that health history, which is just unbelievable, I am in awe of that journey, and I give you all kinds of credit for really pushing through it. But I think some of the gifts that came out of that for you is you went through that personal development boot camp basically from the day you were diagnosed.
Yeah.
And so when you did become an entrepreneur, you already had that mental muscle. I call it resilience. And really what resilience to me is the ability to not let what is, dictate your expectations, dictates how you feel. I think it's similar to what you were saying about the catalyst or the what was excuse. Yeah. Resilience is, being like, this might be true. I have been diagnosed with a fatal disease, but I am not going to let that define me. I am not going to let that dictate how I expect my life is going to be. That being able to do that is ultimately our greatest inner power. And your inner power is so much more powerful than your logic and, physical powers. So you brought this tremendous sense of resilience to your new business. And I love how it's played out in your business. Just to give some people context, when in that first year, what was your average transaction size? Do you remember?
So that would have been, first full year was 21.
Right.
Probably, I would say typically trips were in the late teens. There were a couple of exceptions that were a little higher. But in the early years, there were a couple standouts from some big people in my life. But I would say 20, maybe 18. A lot of transactions, not a lot of big transactions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now today, you recently told me that you've recently upped your minimum transaction size, and it's working. So now your minimum transaction size is
35,000 land only, so excluding air.
Mm-hmm. Right. So and so that's not even your average. That's just your minimum, and people aren't batting an eye.
Not even a little. And you and I concur on this notion that, what you put out there in the world, you get what you expect, kind of a thing, is a Meredith thing that I think about a lot. And, I had those trips that were challenging and went wrong. And I'm thinking about one from Costa Rica that was just a mess. And it was, a 4-star kind of a thing. And I learned from that. And I just finally said, you know what? I'm so dialed into the financial people of New York City, the really big, people at all these institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my referrals come from. And that's where my business comes from. And they are all, really value their time off because they work so hard and want it done right. And the transaction sizes, my biggest transaction ever was a safari for a little over $1 million, as you know. Which
7-figure travel transaction, 7 figures.
Yeah. 10-day trip. Not 100 people either. It's this different land concessions, or it's just quality. It's a lot of things, but it wasn't like private jets either. That was a small component of the getting around, as Hills of Africa days. And and now it's multi 6-figure stuff is extremely common for us. Extremely common.
So if we are considering people who are listening who really want to get into that uber luxury market, selling uber luxury 5-star and beyond, because I think 5-star kind of minimizes what you're selling. What tips do you have for them? What advice do you have?
I'll kind of bullet point it and I think that some of this is going to resonate for everybody and some of it's going to be specific to my journey. But I think there's a little bit of a nugget in each one. Again, my biggest thing is I've been where you're going next. And, you can eliminate a lot of travel volatility by having been to these locations. So you really need a robust travel, amount of travel experience, which if you don't have it, it's another great reason to do the travel MBA program for a year. Learn suppliers, calls, colleagues, and take fam trips.
All the people that have been there. Exactly. Yep.
Right. And then go on these fam trips or familiarization trips where you go. Amira, who works for me and stood next to me for 10 years on Wall Street, was one of my closest friends. asked me after she was ready to retire to join. And I said, okay, let's do it. And I taught her, stuff, and now she's killing it. But one of the first things I said, you have to go on a trip and let's talk about where. And we both agreed Egypt would be kind of a good one because it's exotic, but it's just a whole bunch of things. Wouldn't you know that she went on a fam trip there? So a fam trip was effectively free, and because they want you as suppliers, salespeople to see it. And she's done like 7 or 8 Egypt trips now, and that's propelled her referral cycle, and then the next trips, and now all of a sudden she's at a level too. So that is really, I've been where you're going next thing is very powerful. The next one would be to have colleagues that you can bounce things off of. Again, 72 countries over a lifetime. I haven't been to Asia in a really long time. So while I'm very familiar with it, I would need to go to one of our colleagues and be like, hey, can you get me back up to speed on this? But the
100%.
number one thing is the hardest thing is to have the context, as you said, kind of from the top. If you're in a well-to-do town, and that's probably a good start, but there's no substitute for experience at all. Experience drives intuition, lowers volatility. I mean, if you built a house and designed it, you'd probably make some mistakes as you walked around. Like, I wish I kind of did this Jack and Jill bathroom instead, whatever. By the time you did a second or third one, it would be airtight. So it's the same thing with us for travel. So if you've been and then you've got, you can play on that experience, and you have the list. You got to do the education though to get really. You don't want to go to school on your clients.
Yeah. I love that philosophy. You don't want to go to school on your clients. So let's talk to people who maybe are still in that world that you were in, the Wall Street world, and they are like, oh, wow, that's Stuart. I can't believe he's, completely changed his life. And now he's a crazy success as a travel advisor, has this great travel business. What do you say to people who do have, the right contacts, and they're just kind of not necessarily crippled, but they just haven't been willing to take that leap and maybe consider a career change?
Well, I mean, when I had cystic fibrosis, I would go visit these kids in the hospital and try to help them, and see the way it could be versus the way it is. Because I remember, it almost took my life a couple of times, particularly when I was a junior in high school. It got really precarious, and the goal was to go and talk to them, and they could see that, rather than just the doctors and moms saying, you got to take your medicine. It's like, here's this guy who's 6 feet tall and lives in New York City and in travels. Like, well, how's this possible? Like you need exposure to it. So, to those people that are out there in my position and think that they don't have the skills, that Wall Street doesn't translate well over to other things, I disagree, because Wall Street, at least in the sales and trading kind of roles that I grew up in, it really is for social athletic types that play well in teams. You're fast on your feet. You're smart, but you're not, too smart that you can't talk to people. So that really fits in very nicely here. And if you have the lifetime of growing up in New York City area, or Chicago, or San Fran or something like that, and you have some of those people in your life, then to convert them over to trade it from that whatever world into this world, it's not as hard as leap as you think, but it's also not easy. You have to have the humility to be like, okay, I'm not just going to hang a shingle and say, I'll book your trips. You got to, like I said, you got to get educated. You got to go.
Yeah.
But it is doable. And yeah, that's the first part of my answer. I don't remember what else you asked, but that's you can do it. You can certainly do it. And I did do it. And I think that I guess the other thing that comes to mind is, if you've been in that world for long enough, stands to reason, I hope you've been able to save some money, which means, if you own your house and have a little something, then it's not as much pressure either, right? To take this leap and let it build. Because, while I did do $1 million in the first year, which was very unusual, especially, years ago when
unusual. Yeah.
now it's a little more common to do $1 million, but man, it was not then. Like our top 10, didn't consist of people who did $1 million each at that point.
Yeah.
So it's doable, but it's hard. It takes a thing. But if you don't have the financial pressure on you, then you can afford to relax into this and let it develop. And your clients will feel that too. People know when you're kind of desperate, and that takes us back to the minimums and all that.
Right.
You want to attract people that are right for your business, and saying yes to everything is not the right solution. Though I am talking out of both sides of my mouth, because you do have to do it a bit in the beginning, a bit, but less so if you do a mentoring program. So
what have you learned about high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals and their spending habits, and how they want, how they make a decision to hire someone to do something for them, like plan their travel?
Facebook ads and things like that are probably not going to get you very far with this group. Really is referral, it really is going to take that. You got to talk to Stuart. He's been everywhere, kind of a thing. And, if he can do these types of trips for this kind of a person, like that qualifies you. And I think that's really important. You have to be in control of your business, though. It's your business. You don't go into these calls with these people intimidated and being like, oh, well, you can email me or text me or whatever. Like, no, I don't do text. I want it on email. I've got to follow it. You got to take control, and they're expecting that. Successful people are coming to you for help. And if you are wishy-washy and not controlling your situation, then they're not going to feel that you're as confident and in you, or respect you, by the way.
Yeah.
So both of those things are very real.
You got to get rid of the people-pleasing side of you, believe it or not. And you think it's the opposite. You think you've got to turn on your people-pleasing game as good as it gets, but it's the opposite. You want to have an opinion. You want to disagree. You want to, and just be convicted in your opinion.
And without giving away the name of the person that coached me out of transactional and into things like this, it was very much a way of kind of being the anti-salesperson too.
Yeah.
So you don't call up Meredith if you're my client or prospect. Say, hey, Meredith, I just want to talk to you about, Fiji. Is now a good time? It just feels a little salesy. It feels a little like, I don't know, maybe. But if you're like, hey, Meredith, it's Stu, how you doing? Am I getting you at a bad time? I just wanted to talk to you about one quick thing. Just come at it like the opposite, and like, oh no, that's fine. People come to you about a trip, almost talk them out of it a little bit. Be a little curious, in doubt, yet to be convinced on a topic, and start to be like, do I want this trip? Is this person right for me? Are they going to ghost me? And what things should I set up in my business, like, an upfront fee or other things like that? Do I want to set up to make sure that the people who come through this funnel we're going to have a high close rate, and we're going to be efficient in the process. And these things all take quite a bit of time, but that's where, I saw you had Julia Matheson on, as a good friend of mine, and she was talking about how, some of us get together, and I'm one of the people she gets together with. And, we share notes on how to do this kind of stuff. So you learn the basics, and Travel MBA gives you a launch in the world, and then you start finding your people, and, you just keep getting better at this. But you really do need to, you do need to have a lot of conviction when you're talking to people on the high end, because they want someone who's going to be helpful. They don't want someone who's like, well, you could do this. You could do that. Be like, all right, I take the doctor's approach. I've heard you talk, here's my advice. Here's what I think. And really take the ownership of this thing. Mm-hmm. Be like, I think that this is perfect for you. What do you think? And it probably sounds backwards to some, but at this level, when you're dealing with. And
then That's fantastic advice. And when you can adjust to that, the reward is tremendous, right? I mean, you're just tell us about like you've arrived, this may not be your ultimate goal where you are right now, but I think where you are right now is a pretty amazing place. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like, what that feels like for you.
Well, it's very satisfying because my initial, thought process with travel was, okay, I'm a very social guy. I don't want to just have nothing anymore. I would love to be further educated on travel. And it seems like a great way to stay in touch with my client base from old days, not lose all those people who I worked with for 20 years and really, really enjoy. And oh, by the way, if I can travel at a discount and then garner money through being a travel advisor and apply that to a trip, thereby getting it effectively tax free, you're effectively traveling at, in my opinion, around 35 cents on the dollar. So, for me, this passion project in retirement funds my thing that I'd love to do the most, which is travel. Right. So it's very satisfying. Like Sarah and Carter and I are going to the Galapagos. It's something I've always saved. My son's 8.5, and I've always saved that. And I'm a professional photographer, so it's always been on my list. And wildlife and street photography, but are kind of first cousins. And it's always something I wanted. And I'm doing an aqua expeditions in the owner's suite, which is crazy front of the boat, 861 foot, crazy. They're all their best cabin. Big number, and I paid for it all out of my travel, all my travel commissions, and I'm going to have the time of my life, and so is my son, and so is my wife, and it's so satisfying that I did that, not with the Wall Street money, but through this. It's very satisfying, and then it strengthens my "I've been where you're going next" thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to lead to more bookings. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's just such a win, 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 win.
Right. So you create this wheel, where everything kind of benefits itself. It's just, so it's so satisfying to go from a transactional fun when I was younger, Wall Street thing, to now this, where like I take 6 or 8 international trips a year, all for the betterment of my family and my own life and my professionalism, at massive discounts and writing it off and all subsidized through the direct. I mean, come on. I mean, it's as good as it gets.
It really is as good as it gets. And I think what I was trying to articulate when I first started this episode is that, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, it takes a certain mindset. It's not only about mindset. It's not the only thing it takes, but that mindset is incredibly important and is a deal breaker if you can't cultivate it. And it's the same thing with selling luxury, no matter what kind of luxury product you're selling to high net worth and ultra high net worth people. It takes a certain kind of mindset. And the thing that those mindsets have in common is a very low amount of resistance. Or another way to say it is they're not fear-based at all. They might acknowledge fear, but they just move right past the fear. And you mastered that long before you came to either one of those opportunities. And you mastered it as a child, having to go through that journey that you went through and being a miracle. Honestly, you are a miracle. So what I want people to hear is Stuart's success is because he worked at it, of course, but you don't have to have this, network of people to start a business and be successful selling luxury travel. You don't have to have entrepreneurial skills, but what is a deal breaker is whether or not you can develop that mindset. And if you want an example of what that mindset looks like, look at Stuart Marra.
Well, the mindset is by far the most important. And it was, sink or swim time for all those years. And as open as I am about CF now, prior to November of 19, I didn't tell anybody because I
Right.
really didn't want it to color what
Yeah.
somebody thought of me. It's
Didn't
only
want it to.
after it's over and after I leave Wall Street that I'm kind of open to talking about the positive side of the, making the money and having done well and retiring early. That's cool, fine. But I'm only really willing to talk about that now and the healthcare stuff now because it's balanced. It's like, well, I can see where somebody would be interested in being in my shoes, but I don't particularly appreciate when people, are like, if they say something like, he has it easy or whatever, like there's nothing about my life that was easy. It was all trying to break through the clouds to cruising altitude. And again, if you can break through that, and I did, CF became a gift after so many things were taken away and you're stronger. And, so that's really the big one is the mindset piece. You're right. You can develop the clients, you can develop the skills, you can travel more.
Yeah.
But a lot of my colleagues in travel have a lot of resistance to my notion of setting these higher minimums. And, I think it's a bit of a fear-based thing where they figure there's some scarcity value and those people won't come if I turn them away. And then what, right? Could my business dry up? Well, that's one side of it. That is possible. But if you started from the beginning and learned the whole thing and your bookings keep growing, your quality of bookings keeps growing, and then it's perfectly acceptable at some point to lop off that bottom end. I think Goldman is famous for firing 5% of people kind of every year so that it creates that competition. And I would view that the same way with some of our clients where it's like, if they're not a good fit for you and they're routinely, non-responsive and, a whole myriad of other things, then let them go.
Yeah.
And if you want to know how to get to a place where your average transaction size is six figures, which is really close to what mine is when you take the whole thing and put it together, almost every trip is six figures on average, right? So if you want to get to that place, then you have to have no resistance to having that minimum because you can't have it both ways. You can't take $12,000 trips and expect to get $1 million trips. It's just, maybe you can speak to the mindset of that better than I can. I've learned a lot of it from you. I just have no resistance to it, as you would say. And you don't do it the first day, but this is how you get to that place. If this is what you want, that's what I want.
It's a muscle, right? Just like going a physical muscle. And, you can strengthen your muscles by going to the gym every day or doing weight workouts every day. But when you stop doing them, the muscle will fade. What's the word? Shrink. Thank you. Atrophy is the word I was looking for. It's the same thing with the mental muscle. And I love your plane analogy because it is such a great visual for people who are trying to embrace cultivating a success mindset. If you think about an airplane, like a pilot, when you first take off and there's turbulence, what is the most common thing a pilot's going to do if there's some serious turbulence is go higher, right? Raise the altitude. And that is exactly what you have to do to cultivate a success mindset is you have to let go of the resistance. And when you let go of the resistance, you will raise the altitude. You naturally go higher.
It takes a lot of energy. But I would rephrase too, the taking of everything, maybe not everything, but most of everything. Somebody calls you up and they're like, I want to go to Dominican Republic for $8,000 or whatever. You're like, okay, well, like if every transaction, travel advisors agree, every trip takes the same amount of time. So based on that, you want to have higher dollar amounts so that yield is better. Otherwise, you could end up working for $20 an hour if you're not careful. And that's probably not your stated objective. So you have to be careful on that front how you take things.
I want to change direction a little bit. And let's just talk about selling luxury. And I think for people who really want to move and transition into selling more luxury, higher transaction sizes. I think the most common belief is, well, I need to have the clients to do that. And yes, that can be true. But I think there's a couple of things that you also need to have that is overlooked. And I would name them, and I'll let you name some too. But I would say, number one, you have to have the right partner relationships.
Yeah.
You have to have access to the hotel elite programs. You have to be with the right consortia if you want to sell luxury. And I think a community of people, like you have to have your little circle of people that you can lean into, like you were talking about, when you can just, pick up the phone and tap somebody else's wisdom. I think those are three, and probably a fourth is just professional development, right? If you want to sell luxury, you've got to have a brand that oozes luxury. Yeah. And not cutesy and not homemade and not, and it is surprising to me to this day. I remember 15 years ago going to travel industry trade shows with my little booth at For Gift when I started the Global Institute for Travel Entrepreneurs. And one of the things I would do to get people to come to my booth is a free business card analysis. And I cannot tell you how many business cards looked homemade. It was clip art, images, at Gmail email addresses, or at, remember, AOL.com. And I mean, just such simple things that you can't do that if you want to sell luxury. You have to look professional. You have to have a brand that oozes luxury, but you also have to have a brand that is rooted in who you are. It's really, and I think your brand is amazing. I love your brand. I think you did an amazing job with your brand, because it's authentic to you, but it also is professional. It is luxury. So what would you say to someone who really wants to get into luxury, and with the mindset that they just don't have the clients and that's all they really need to figure out? What would you say is really important to have?
I really think the "I've been where you're going" next thing is what resonates the most for people, because, for starters, my favorite asset are my colleagues, right? Because a supplier may try to sell you on a destination, or an experience because it's in their best interest, but you call one of your travel advisor partners and they will never steer you wrong. Ever, ever, ever. Like, hey, is this the right hotel for this type of client? Absolutely not. Right? Whereas a partner will be like, yeah, no, it's great for everybody. They're always going to say that. So, if you've been places and you have a network, you can pick up the phone in a minute and get a download from somebody on a destination. So my friend Elizabeth and I did this thing where we record, when you come back from a trip, you record your screen and your itinerary and the hotels, and you just walk your fellow travel advisors through it, and you can get up on Iceland in 15 minutes because you just had a professional travel advisor who went.
Yeah.
And walk to you through it and how they do other things for clients, because you're with the supplier. Now you have a relationship with the supplier too. They maybe make an introduction to you. And it's like, out there in the world, when you go book something, right? If you don't have the hotel elite program, they all say upgrade subject to availability, but someone's got to be at the top of the list. And it's always the person if you book through the Opulent Explorer, then the person at the top of the list is the guest.
It's you.
It's you. So, really, if you've been to these places, then you can help your colleagues. And if you can help your colleagues, then they're going to help you. And you really are very, very hard to have a blind spot in that situation. So my favorite two are having been. So get out. If you're well-traveled, get out there and travel, and then develop, be a giver, be a giving person, do these types of things. And we ask that to be in our little group of people that have access to this. You have to give too. You have to give two of them, then you get access. If we just do this and just put it out on the internet, they'll never grow. It'll never go anywhere. But if we all give, it really works.
I
So
love that philosophy. That is awesome. There are so many more things I want to ask you about, so we're probably going to have a part 2 or an episode 2. Cuz I mean, there's like the whole world of technology I haven't even touched, and that you're quite passionate about that, and you're always giving such amazing tips to the fellow top producers and the top producers club. So we'll save that for another day. My favorite closing question is, well, actually, I have 2 questions. I'll wait for the closing question. The first question I want to ask is, what struggle did you have? Because, we all have struggles. So, on your travel entrepreneurial journey, what is a struggle that you did have that you were able to successfully navigate around, and how did you do that?
taking on too much. It was intentional because you want to say yes in the beginning. And I know I keep saying don't say yes to everything, but in the beginning, you really got to learn. So you take on a lot, you learn the destination, you learn suppliers, you learn what you want and don't want from clients and how to guide the process. So in the beginning, I was really overwhelmed with all this. It was a lot of booking. There was a lot of servicings. It's the only way I got good though. And then I started to, really tap into my fellow top producers, and you gravitate towards some people naturally. And my friend Elizabeth and I really, we talk multiple times a day, and
Shout out
we
to Elizabeth, EDQ.
EDQ. He's in French Polynesia right now as we tape this. But anyhow, we would talk quite a bit, and we were very complimentary of each other, and we just kept raising the bar. Like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And lo and behold, you kind of you're kind of digging out, right? Like you're literally under the sand, and all of a sudden you're just like a horror movie. Your arm pops out, and like you're out. And then once you're out, you're like, "Oof, it's nicer up here." Like, how do I stay up here and make it
Yeah.
fun? So that's really the way, was take on a lot to learn, and then leverage your colleagues. And what do they do right? What do they do wrong in order to mitigate problems with your clients, with booking trips and getting ghosted on quotes, all of it. There's a lot of collective wisdom. And sometimes people are contrary indicators, which is great too. Like I literally have no sense of direction. So if I think it's a left, I instinctively turn right because I'm always wrong. And there are people out there that are totally not right for you. And you're like, I don't care. I love what you say, but I'm not going to do any of that because I think you're wrong on that subject all the time, or that's not the direction I want to go in. But it all informs you. It's like reading 4 newspapers. If you just read one, then, you're going to be, you're going to be that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. That is really, really good analogy too. So you may have already answered this question, so you're going to have to come up with a different, but this is the closing question that I love finishing with is, share with us one of your favorite, oh my God, pinch me, I get to do this for a living moments.
Yeah. It's the easiest question for me to answer, actually, because I am, my favorite hotelier is Belmond. I love the way Belmond operates. They have this just beautiful, in the style of the destination, exquisite Italian service. It's just really my favorite. And I leaned into that partnership, and I encourage people to lean into partnerships that suit them, that speak to them, suit their brand, suit their clients. For me, Belmond is really the one. And I remember being invited by Natalie and the team to do a Bravissimo in Sicily. And I took my wife, and it's the top 10 Bellman agents in the United States and the top 10 from the rest of the world. So we're there with these 20 people and their plus ones and all of senior management of Bellman in Sicily. And we're at the Timeo Hotel in Sicily in Taormina, and we're at the presidential suite. We're having drinks. And, Mount Etna's in the distance. It's a beautiful night, sunset. And they say, follow us. And we walk through the hotels and wind up on the stage of this 2,000-year-old Greek amphitheater, which is right behind the hotel. which is where when Andrea Bocelli does a concert, he stays in the presidential suite, walks through that very thing. Arrive on stage, there's a virtuoso pianist, not virtuoso,
Oh my
sort of like a
gosh.
true
Yeah.
virtuoso pianist playing. And then as it gets darker, out walks Claudia Seguro, one of the top 10 opera singers in the world, to do a private concert for us in conjunction with the pianist as Mount Etna erupts. I was like, I remember saying to the Bellman folks, I'm like, how did you also get Mount Etna to erupt? Like it was bonkers. And then one of those tables that's like 200 yards long, kind of, Tuscan
Wow.
tables
Yeah.
with a band, under the stars. And then, Claudio gets up and starts singing with the band. Meredith, it was like,
oh my
I got
gosh.
no words. My wife was like, I feel like I stepped into somebody else's life. This is out of this world.
Yeah. And that is the enviable life that's possible with this journey.
Buy that. You couldn't buy that experience if you tried.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
I'm in awe just thinking about it. All right. Well, to be continued. Lots more to talk about with you. So maybe at a later date. But thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom and sharing your story and being vulnerable and honest and open. And possibly even sharing some of your trade secrets. If anybody is curious about using you as their travel advisor, how did they get a hold of you?
Info at Opulent Explorer, OPULENT Explorer, ER.com. And if you're interested in hearing a little more about the Travel MBA program and how that kind of was the catalyst from Wall Street or any kind of serious profession into this, reach out to Meredith at Gifted or me there, and then I'll connect us to have another chat about it, because
Perfect.
It was the start of the journey.
The start of the journey, and what a journey you made of it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You should be proud of yourself.
I'm proud. I am. It's been really rewarding. It's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful thing. You got to just be willing to take a leap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when you, be willing to take the leap. And for some people that can be very, very scary. For others, who've learned to be comfortable with discomfort, it's not as scary.
Right. Which is it's a muscle you need to work on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you, everyone,
Absolutely.
for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for listening to the Travel Business Unpacked podcast, where we dive deep into the exciting world of travel entrepreneurship. If you're looking for more, we have some great resources for both aspiring travel entrepreneurs and existing travel advisors. Aspiring travel entrepreneurs, if you're thinking about turning your love for travel into a profitable business and enviable life, take our Travel Entrepreneurial Suitability Score quiz. It's fun and insightful. Just go to travelmba.giftedtravelnetwork.com. Find out if you're ready to professionalize your passion for travel. Current travel advisors, if you've been selling travel but haven't been able to grow your sales beyond $200,000 in a 12-month window of time, our quiz can help there too. Again, you can find that at travelmba.giftedtravelnetwork.com. Advisors looking for a change. If you're seeking an elevated hosting experience for the luxury travel advisor, check us out at giftedtravelnetwork.com. We'd love to chat with you. And with that, we wrap up today's journey. We hope we inspired you today, or at a minimum, put a smile on your face.